This is Think or Be Eaten. I don't know which number it is, so I'm not going to assign one. We have today John Bonanno. John and I have been emailing back and forth probably longer than I can think of right now, going back to the Beyond the Grassy Knoll days. And he's got, I wouldn't say he has a different take, but he approaches Aldous Huxley, somebody who I beat up on from time to time and lump in, like I said, with the dark characters. But there might be something there, and especially what's interesting to a lot of folks is to compare Huxley and George Orwell, a.k.a. Eric Blair, or the other way around, and maybe we'll get into that today too. But no matter what, John Bonanno is with us today from the great state of Maine, and how's those black flies, buddy?
The black flies have almost gone. They were devouring us for a while, but they were replaced by the mosquitoes, and now we just have terrible weather, rain, 48 degrees, nasty.
Sounds great to me.
But at least the black flies have gone for a while.
Yeah, I escaped their presence. I heard a lot about them. Camped in Maine around Sebago in early September. It was
you don't get black flies unless you have a pristine, beautiful environment. So that's
okay.
One good thing we have going for us.
But I missed them, thankfully. All right, let's get to the good stuff. Aldous Huxley. I think most people who have spent any time with him probably his background makes them a little bit, I don't want to say contemptuous, that might be too strong a word, but we don't know we like Aldous given his lifestyle. Can you at least give us a thumbnail on Aldous? Okay,
well, I came to Aldous Huxley, I'll just set myself up a little bit. I'm a 59-year-old guy, came up in the 60s, and Huxley at that time was sort of in a renaissance at the time, mainly because of his association with LSD. He wrote the article, the essay, The Doors of Perception,
right,
from which Jim Morrison took the name of his band. And that was about LSD and his experience with it. So that's when I came in contact with the guy, and he was in Life magazine, articles about him. And I began to read his essays, and beyond the drug-oriented ones. And I found them fascinating, not that I agreed with everything in them. And from that time, I haven't been, I wouldn't say I'm a Huxley expert at all, and I haven't read all of his books. But I've been interested in the man and as an intellect. So let's set him up. He came up, he was born in the late 19th century from a well-known British intellectual family, the Huxleys. He had his grandfather was a famous biologist, of course, known as Darwin's bulldog. Defended Darwin, didn't go along with everything in evolution, which a lot of people don't realize. He had some problems with Darwin, but all in all, he felt evolution was a more accurate way to look at how life developed on Earth than what was available otherwise. His brother is a biologist, Julian Huxley, who is, of course, a great evolutionist and defender of it. His granduncle was Matthew Arnold, the British poet and the conservative critic. Now, Matthew Arnold, this is sort of a background of where Huxley's going to go. His most famous poem was a poem called Dover Beach. And this poem was concerned itself with faith disappearing from the world in association probably in the late Victorian age when people were no longer accepting the Bible as a source of facts, as a source of unerring accuracy in describing the world, because they felt that Darwin had cut out the underpinnings of it. And so if you just to read like one stanza from this poem, I think it sets up Huxley pretty well.
Okay.
And Huxley later on became very concerned. He wrote essays on the problem of faith, and we could get into later on. But just this stanza, it's a few lines. The sea of faith was once too at the full, and round earth's shore lay like the folds of a bright girdle furled. But now I only hear its melancholy, long, withdrawing roar, retreating to the breath of the night wind, down the vast edges, drear and naked shingles of the world. And Arnold's solution to the withdrawing of faith from the world was to resort to love, and let us love one another, and work it out that way in this crazy world that no longer has faith in it. So that's a bit of a family background for Huxley. They were great educators. His grandfather,
T.H.?
the biologist T.H. Huxley, was also a reformer in education, and some of the things he did, which I think I put in my little missive to you, was he opposed learning by rote. He thought that there should be aesthetic education for all, domestic economy for girls, and he also favored teaching the Bible, not because he believed in it, but because he was seriously perplexed to know by what practical measure the religious feeling, which is the essential basis of conduct, was to be kept up in the present utterly chaotic state of opinion in these matters without its use. And he called it the most democratic book in the world. So it's a bit of a cynical teaching of religion. Of course, today we couldn't even do that, but in those days that was would be considered a reform attitude to teaching the Bible. And Huxley came up in all that, and we have to remember he came up as a young man before, as a youth, he lost his eyesight for a year or so, and his eyesight was compromised for the rest of his life. And that got him out of fighting in World War I. And he became an educator, and one of his students was George Orwell, famously.
Jeez. Yeah, right.
So George Orwell and Huxley knew each other from early on, and they sparred a bit over what was to come. But as a background to Huxley, and then Huxley, after he got out of education, and he became involved with this Bloomsbury group of writers and artists and intellectuals in England, which sort of an effete group. They were considered by some. You had people like Virginia Woolf and others. And Huxley famously, his first novel, which I believe was, I don't want to say, I forget the title, but his first novel somewhat lampooned the society of this group, and he was almost asked to leave at that point. He became persona non grata, and his early novels lampooned British society. That they were very superficial, he felt, in some ways, and that he also skewered their attitudes of superiority. And not long after that, he moved to the United States, where he continued to write. He had a lifelong contract to write novels, and he wrote many essays. And I got a lot of information on him. I subscribed to Harper's Magazine, and they have their whole catalog back 100 and whatever years, back to the Civil War, online. And you can find, it's an awesome resource, and you can find, I found several of his essays, which helped me out with this there.
Can I ask you a little bit of a sidebar question? So hang on to where you're going.
Okay.
We've talked, and you, from time to time, if I've been with the Collinses or whoever it should be, speaking about literature and certainly film, TV, as being both predictive programming and futuristic. Since I don't think that there was any predictive programming involved in a lot of the writers' works of the first half of the 20th century, but I do believe there's a lot of futuristic stuff. Did you see anything in Huxley to a certain degree where you got the feeling that he was either extremely prescient or whether he had an idea about the way things were going to be?
Well, by the time we get to Brave New World, we'll see that. In his early writings, not so much. He was mainly looking at the society and the culture he came up with. And, after World War I, it was generally accepted that World War I destroyed a whole generation of British youth. And it shattered a lot of illusions about things. And he his novels concerned British society in those days and how it was lost and looking for something. And I don't think he got into the predictive programming until Brave New World. And he was influenced by H.G. Wells, as everybody was. Now, I think most of us that are involved in these kind of things and look at these things will think that H.G. Wells might not have been the best guy going out there. He, his ideal world was a world of a collectivism, ruled by science, and Wells set out to actually lampoon that when he began to write Brave New World, but then it went in another direction, and that's how he got to Brave New World. He was reacting to Wells, and Wells did not like Brave New World.
No,
Wells considered Brave New World to be treachery against the belief in progress and science. He felt that scientists, by nature, somehow would do the right thing and wouldn't allow the world to come to something like that. And I think that may have been a bit of a smokescreen.
Well, some of the if you will, dirt that I think Huxley gets on him, and perhaps more than deserved, is that you did have this notion of eugenics, and in that camp, which included Wells and Huxley and who else can we throw in there? Actually, I think it goes back to Erasmus Darwin, but anyway. There were different... Francis Galton, there's the other one. There were different attitudes towards the way they thought they could perfect society. I have to admit, though, Wells was probably the most radical, and I would almost call him cold. And, of course, there's that famous exchange, which you can find a transcript of on Galton.com, when they had this meeting around 1909, I think it is, or 1904, whatever. And Wells comes right out and says, nice for selective breeding, but you have to slay the hindmost. And I mean, Galton looked at him like he had 10 heads. And he pretty much dressed Galton down at that point. But you see, this continuum, which I've seen in a lot of books, kind of runs from Darwin through T.H. Huxley, through Wells, through the Huxleys, and Galton, and Charles Darwin.
Well, then it goes right on. I found some fascinating essays, again in the Harper's, by K.B.S. Haldane, who was the prime proponent in the 20th century of scientific humanism. And he also felt that the state run by the best minds would know the best thing to do for all of us. And those are some wonderful essays. Not that I agree with them, but that's predictive essaying. He tells you where they're going with it and what they want to do.
Oh, and I don't know if you can help me out with this, and this is just an aside. Excuse me for this, but when I saw that name, it keeps ringing something in my brain where somewhere along the line I thought I encountered a substance that's a poison that's called Haldane.
Haldane sounds like a bug killer.
That's what I kind of think I'm thinking of. But anyway, I was like, how to lend your name to a product?
Yeah.
So at any rate, continue with what you were going to say along the lines of eugenics.
Well, just to finish up the background on Huxley, as I said, he started out writing poetry, and because his first book of essays was called Do What Thou Will, which sounds a lot like Aleister Crowley's motto of Do What Thou Wilt.
Yeah.
And some said that they had met at some point, but I can't find any hard evidence of that. I did a lot of research on it, and it's basically some assertions by a couple of people that they had met, and but neither of them mention it anywhere. So, is
it the case that a lot of people throw them together, and I understand why. Usually everybody gets the two authors together in the same class. For me, it was my senior year in high school. But it seems that Huxley and Orwell, both to a certain extent, warn in different tones about the shape of things to come. Huxley approaches it, I guess, from an upper-class upbringing, whereas with Orwell, it was pretty much government service. What do you think about that? And does that really have any bearing, or is this another thing where we don't like Huxley because we look at him as being part of a British patrician crowd?
It could be. Now, to start out with, I'll tell you that Orwell is a much more compelling writer. 1984 is a much more compelling book and a more emotional book than Brave New World, which to me does seem cold and distant, but I think that was what Huxley wanted to show. Mm-hmm. He wanted to show an emotionless future of empty pleasure. And he did believe, and he wrote to Orwell about it, he felt that his book was, in the long run, would be the more predictive one of what would happen. Orwell wrote in 1948, and he was looking back at what the world had just gone through, and he was projecting from there, whereas Huxley was saying, look, in the long run, it's a lot... I think I sent you a quote by Neil Postman about that it's a lot easier to control the world by giving people what they want than by beating them over the head. And we can. I feel that's what we've got now. We're amusing ourselves. We're just amused to distraction.
Well, so you make the point then, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but let me see. Tell me if I'm correct with this assessment. In fact, I think Orwell and Wells and Huxley could both be right, and that both of what they're saying can cohabitate. In other words, Huxley saying people can be taken over more or less by just allowing themselves to love their servitude, if you know what I mean, to live in a world of soma and pleasures. But that comes from, I would think, having a rather gray existence, which is what Orwell was talking about. So I'm wondering the two of them don't come together, where you have an existence much like, I even think of the parallel between the Eloi and the Morlocks, where you have an existence that isn't so great. So how do you make it through every day? And that is perhaps numbing one's other sensibilities with some kind of pleasure machine or whatever it should be, whether it's soma or, virtual reality. Could it possibly be that they both are right and both will happen, either one after the other or concurrently?
I agree with that. I think that those who want to control the world will use anything. If they need to be nasty about it, they'll be nasty about it. If it's more efficient and easier to be nice about it, they'll be nice about it. Those that they need to crack down on, they'll crack down on. Orwell saw everybody getting cracked down, but he was writing from the point of view of the average person, as you say, the bureaucrat.
The proles,
The proles. Who was someone who was a little above the proles, throwing the things down the memory hole. He was a bit of a little higher than the average person. And we have to remember that Brave New World was written from the point of view of an alpha, someone at the highest class.
Right.
And so the alpha would not necessarily experience what those of the lowest classes would. We'd get a different book if Huxley's main character was one of the lower type people.
But do you believe that Huxley was privy to a certain mindset?
I think he was. I think he moved in amongst those people that would be making policy. Now his family, I don't think were policymakers. They weren't aristocrats by any means. They weren't especially wealthy. They were well off, but he would definitely, him in his youth and his family members would move among the ruling class. They would know them and they would deal with them, and they worked for them in some cases and helped them with policy. And who those people were. I'd like to deal with stuff I know, and I don't know for a fact who he would have dealt with and what he would have gotten and if he got any marching orders. But I really think that Huxley was trying to blow the whistle on things more than in the best way he could. And like I said, he was a bit ostracized. He left England for a reason, I think.
Do you think he wrote that basically giving the finger to Wells and some of those characters?
Oh, I think definitely. I don't know if I can find a quote. I have a stack of quotes here, and I put some of them on my blog spot if anyone cares to look.
Yeah, let's talk about that just for a moment if we could. And your blog spot is Johnny?
Johnny B.
with
93.
Johnny with a Y, right?
Right.
Johnny B. 93.
Johnnny, 2 N's and a Y.
Okay.
B 93, I believe.
All right.
Johnny B 93 blogspot.com.
All right.
And I just have a few things. I haven't really been maintaining it all the while, but recently I've been putting a few things, and as I get closer to my retirement, I'll be putting more up there, and I have some other stuff that people may or may not be interested in, and if you want to contact me, you can do it through there. There's an email address. And if you make sense and you're not a raving lunatic, I will answer you.
Yeah, good luck. They made me run for cover. And again, it's johnnyb93.blogspot.com. No big deal. That link will be up with the audio. Okay. And I also want to say, just because he's not with us today, Gordon Comstock had written something about Orwell versus Huxley, and that you can find in the e-zine that we have out inside the Grassy Knoll, which you can reach by going to thinkorbeaten.com/the knoll. And that's just, he can't be here if people want to take a look at what Gordon has to say. That's fine as well.
Gordon is much more happy with Orwell than Huxley, that's for sure.
But this is what I think a lot of us come from. I mean, we're pretty much, Johnny Lunch Buckets, and we kind of cleave to Orwell. Just because
he lived more of a real life. I mean, Huxley lived almost he lived a fantasy life in a way. Moving amongst the British intellectual class, and then coming to the United States and basically living in Hollywood in the land of dreams, and then from there moving into the sort of the LSD world of the early '60s. And people that certainly weren't anchored in reality in a certain way, or maybe more anchored in a higher reality. I don't know. It depends on how you want to look at it. But yeah, Huxley is a much more ethereal figure. He's different than most people. He was very impressive. He was a striking human being, and it's hard to identify with him. And if you read his essays, they're very erudite and they're very learned. And they make allusions to things most of us don't know about. So they're hard to understand in some ways.
And I'm sorry, Johnny.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
And that's what I heard in that famous speech. It might have been the last that he gave. I guess that was at Berkeley in '62, The Ultimate Revolution.
Right, one of the last, yeah.
And I listened to it, and when somebody speaks in the manner that he does, it almost bristles you.
It's off-putting. It's tough, It's he had one of those classical educations that we don't experience anymore, and probably never did in this country, except among the highest classes. He did give you an air of superiority. He couldn't help it. He was a brilliant man that had an extensive education, and a lot of us are put off by that. There's a natural American tendency to distrust people that have highfalutin ways, I guess, and I think it's almost a little bit of a prejudice we have about that. Plus the fact that he's a Brit and he speaks in a British accent, and but I found, like I said, I haven't read any of his early novels for many years. I read a couple of them in the '60s, and as I noted to you, I think they helped cure me of any Anglophilia I may have had. I'm not especially fond of the Brit. I don't hate the Brits, but I'm not the person that goes gaga over a British accent.
But something was going on there, John, and I don't know if you've heard some other stuff I kicked around. But coming out of London, whether it's the city of London or London, especially at the turn of the century, there's a lot of predictions, a lot of, society shaping, futurism that people got involved with. And I mean, not only that, but, I think of Halford Mackinder and what he projected would be the last empire, which I think we're seeing unfold right now in Eurasia, to talk about a Robert Benson Hughes who forecasts a third world war before the first is fought. All these individuals were in and around London, most of them going to the London School of Economics and such. We think Europe is effete. We think aristocracy is dead or monarchy is dead. But that royal attitude continues, and not so much that these individuals were in that bloodline, but I've got to believe that there was, if not something very structured, there was some kind of sphere over there, John, at that time.
Well, let's look at it.
Okay, great.
What did we have at that time? We had people in the know realize that the British Empire was untenable as it was. It was the end. There was no way this little island could control. If you look at one of those old maps from those days when the British Empire is colored pink
right.
on a map of the world, and it's looked like half the world was the British Empire. You look at those early 20th century maps. You see India, Canada. You see half of Africa. All the colors of the British Empire, which is now the British Commonwealth, for the most part. And they knew it was coming to an end. They couldn't directly do it anymore. They had to do it by proxy or through more underhanded or maybe other ways.
Yeah, it's called the U.S.
Well, we became the hammer.
That's right.
But these people realized it was coming to an end, and they had to rule via other methods. And I'm sure at that time they were working on it. And a lot of the what we see as modern public relations came out of that era. We saw subterfuge. We saw, as I have a little thing on my blog about Rhodes, Cecil Rhodes.
That's right.
He established a fortune with the De Beers Company, and he used it to set up the Rhodes Scholarships. And his original legacy stated that it was one of his goals was to bring the United States back under British dominance.
He called them to be the brute beasts that would fight the wars that British best blood could no longer.
Right. And they knew, especially as World War I unfolded and they just lost so many, they knew they couldn't directly fight these wars anymore.
Well, they got bloodied a little bit more than they thought they would in the Boer War, and then on top of that you have World War I. And so, you have to be dumb to think that you can sustain what you're doing militarily, so I think they went to the next level. I think, who cares what I think, but I mean, it seems to me that the United States definitely was employed as a hitman for the fortunes of the continent of Europe, which I think the old world still holds sway. And if you take a look at the 20th century into this 21st, I mean, what other nation has been at war, bearing arms more than we have?
I can't think of one.
No, and also, one other thing, Joan Vion made a point, and we did something a couple of years ago, where when it became clear that England couldn't militarily keep their thumb on a number of nations, such as India, sub-Saharan Africa, what she claims, and I think she made a good case for it, is that they said, okay, look, we'll decolonize, we'll turn over your country to you, but, and then she went on to say what they did was, the trade-off was their votes in the UN, so that Britain could still get its way, though it only apparently had one vote, if you know what I mean. They had more than that. And so they look at the UN also as being an extension of empire for the Brits. So if you've heard that only for the first time, you got to think about it. But I kind of believe that Britain decided we can't fight this anymore as flesh and blood, but we can control it through diplomacy and money.
Right, and we see like the beginnings of Tavistock and all those kind of things, and they had to, and this is the whole where Huxley is going, the Brave New World, ruling by subtle means, mind control, drugs, genetic modification, and this is where we are. I mean, we're seeing it, and it's not even a nationalistic thing; it's something else. It's almost as if, it's heading, the world is naturally heading. I was thinking this morning as I got up, and I had the news on, and they're talking about the Supreme Court, and they're putting a liberal on the court, and I'm looking, okay, they have a Supreme Court, and they have some people consider some judges liberals, some judges are considered conservatives. But if you look at them, one thing they're all in favor of is big government. There's no judge that is a judge that you might get from that would be in favor of controlling the size of government. It's all the liberals want a big government to maintain their bureaucracies and supposedly to help the average guy, and the conservatives like big government to project power and protect the interests of the corporations. So you don't have anyone interested in a small government. And it's like we're inexorably heading to bigger and bigger government. It's like that's the consensus.
Yeah.
And the world is heading to a big government, the one world government. I think it's inevitable sometime in the next 150, 200 years there'll be one world government. Now, what will be the nature of it? Will it be a brutal world government or not? Or will it be subtly controlling? What kind of freedom will it tolerate? And I hate to say it, but I think it's inevitable. It's going to happen. I mean, I don't see anyone able to stop it unless the system itself just collapses. I think at times they bite off a bit more than they can chew, and I think they also don't really understand the nature of man. And that, I think if there's any weak spot in where this is all going, it's that. They truly have a materialist view. It's like, they set up these dialectics like capitalism and communism, but they're both sides of the same materialist coin.
Absolutely.
And they ignore any component beyond that there's anything outside of the material existence of the world, or there's another component that underlies it, or that there's a spark in human beings beyond all that. And I think that's the flaw. I think that's the Achilles heel in the whole system that we see coming, and the thing that they tend not to pay attention to. I think Huxley in the end saw that. Getting back to Huxley, he believed in the perennial philosophy, which basically states that the universe is more than it appears. You don't know exactly what it is, but there's something besides just the stuff that we touch. And by the end of his life, he truly believed, and that's where he split with, his brother disagreed with him on that, and he split with, the scientific humanists.
And he split with Wells. He also split with Wells, correct?
Oh, early on, Wells and when he wrote Brave New World, that was it with Wells. Wells did not like Brave New World because maybe it hit a little too close to what was going to happen. Maybe he felt he was spilling the beans. I don't know. I wasn't privy to any private conversations, but all we can do is just speculate on that.
Well, let me ask you about this. Do you believe there's any amount of parody or lampoon, which might be a little too crude a term, in Huxley's Brave New World, more or less to flip people like Wells?
Oh, yeah. Well, actually, I think Mustafa Mon may have been modeled on... No, actually, it wasn't Mustafa Mon, but one of the characters in the book, where they're growing all the embryos for all the various classes, was modeled on J.B.S. Haldane. And Haldane also became a character in the novels by, was it C.P. Snow, The Curious Strength, and all that trilogy on Mars. Mm-hmm. Was it Snow? I may be wrong on that. But that Mars trilogy. And Haldane was a character in those books. And he was, they definitely did take real people and use them for carry. And that's how, like I said, how Huxley got in trouble with the Bloomsbury Group when they felt he was hitting a little too close to home in his social satire novels. I've lost this forever. Too bad I couldn't go back, but we were to read Brave New World in the second half of my senior year, obviously senior English, and it was even further along. And what was interesting at the time, it was 1969. I had shut down school because I knew, because of the point system that we had, that I had passed. I could flunk any marking period from that point on, and I was still going, if you know what I mean. There was no problem getting a degree. I had signed a letter of intent for a scholarship. I was all set, so I wasn't listening. And I was not interested in something which I considered as abstract as Brave New World. Now, my classmate, Pilot Pete, the only time, we were friends for 1,000 years, only class we had together
was that English class. I believe he read it earnestly, but I just blew it off. But you know what was going on at that time, too? In that senior year, all of us who were seniors, you found out who went heavily into drugs. Everybody's yearbook picture is, of course, is in that summer before your senior year, and everybody's short hair and all that. Well, you should have seen it, what everybody looked like in June of 1969. So I'm wondering, this is a long way of saying it, John, but I'm wondering how many of my classmates were reading this, already experimenting and just loving the heck out of this book.
Well, the thing about that book, though, it's really, Huxley said the book is a dystopia. It's an anti-utopia. It's not what he wanted. And he specifically said it's a warning, a long-term warning. And the drug, Soma is not a real good-time drug. I mean, it's more like a Prozac. It makes you happy with the way things are. And, Huxley actually, I think he mentioned how, at first he thought drugs were more of a threat to human freedom, but by the time he got to LSD and mescaline, he felt they were not such a threat. And, of course, he famously died asking his wife to inject him with one final dose of LSD so he could take the big leap. totally out there.
Not to hammer this down, but you bring up a good point. But now remember, and I think to a certain degree you can relate, that when you talk about Brave New World as dystopia, hello, this was the United States in 1969. I mean, we had gone through race riots, Vietnam, always. They opened up the Pandora's box of drugs, and like you said, even if Soma wasn't the greatest thing in the world, you got to remember you're dealing with 17-year-olds who aren't looking at it that way because they look outside the window at a world that's completely berserk, and they want to go hide someplace. And the other thing I think was kindled during this time, and that was basically sex without love. I mean, with the old term free love, which makes me want to puke, but but that was part of it as well. All the things that could, I think, take the edge off a lot of the problems that were facing us. I mean, the guys were worried that if they didn't get to college, that they would have no choice but to go to Vietnam. Some knew they were destined to go there. You know what I'm saying? So
yeah,
it was crazy. And so this book at that time might have meant a lot more to people that I had, that were my classmates. I read it again in 2000, and of course now I have a different. Here I am, 49 years old or whatever. I can never look at it the way that I would have looked at it back in '69. So something was lost there. But could you imagine, and maybe you do, John, maybe you went through that, about how this book might have impacted people in high school, anywhere from 65 through, like, say, 70.
I agree. I think it became, I don't know if they teach the book now in high school. I know back then it was pretty ubiquitous.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, almost everybody got it. And, or a lot of people, it was assigned. I doubt it would be assigned today because, the political correctness aspect, there's a lot of sex in the book, not a lot, but there's sex in the book.
Yeah.
And, the thing we also have to remember is there's free love in the book, but Huxley, he said this. I found this in an essay called Fashions in Love, here's a short excerpt. He said, "Nothing is more dreadful than a cold, unimpassioned indulgence, and love infallibly becomes cold and unimpassioned when it is too lightly made." And he was trying to say, the sex became meaningless in Brave New World because it was just, they did it like they'd go to the movies, and you do it with anybody, and it was almost impolite to refuse. He also, Huxley mentioned that in another essay he wrote on observing cats, that Siamese cats, when you put them together, a male and a female, they'll fight for days, and you almost have to separate them, and finally they'll get over it and fall in love. And he said that tension is important for real passion and real love and real feeling. And if you don't have that, it's just meaningless. And so he also felt that the search for happiness is kind of an empty search because without tension, without friction, there can't be any real happiness. It just becomes indulgence. And I think that's what he was trying to say in the book. And like I said, his writing, I think his writing is a little distant for us. It's not, like it fits with the theme of the novel, but I find his essays much more compelling than Brave New World, as for interest. Once you get by some of his vocabulary and such, I think his essays tell a lot more about him. He was concerned with faith, and one more point I'd like to make about him, I don't know how we're running for time, is he said that the search, collecting facts, collecting knowledge is easy, and maybe today it's not so easy, but he said anyone can find facts. The key is getting understanding out of the facts. Knowledge and facts can be collected. And, I was thinking in terms of, people, looking at the Bible and being concerned about how the Bible doesn't represent reality, and it's, if you try to find science in the Bible, you will be disappointed. And if you try to find facts in the Bible, you'll find some, but you'll also find some things that, if you do an honest look at it, may not be right, may not fit with the world as we know it. But just going to the rabbis and the Kabbalists, the surface of the Bible, like the literal truth of the Bible, is kind of a futile search, because the surface of the Bible, the old Jews, the rabbis would say, is, they're nice stories, and they can teach you some lessons, but you need to find understanding behind it, and that's where the value of the book is, and then ultimately truth you can find there, and Huxley makes the same point, that anybody can collect facts. Science can collect facts. And like I said, I was watching cable news this morning, and you don't even get facts and knowledge anymore in the news. You just get, Joe Scarborough telling Mika Brzezinski that, she should take some Ambien or something, whatever. But it doesn't make sense. You just look for some facts on the news, you can't even find those anymore. So facts are almost irrelevant to our modern world. I mean, I look around, you've got to find the facts on your own because the media won't give it to you. But then collecting the facts and creating knowledge out of it, right, as Huxley said, is like the goal of man. And then ultimately finding truth, it might be beyond human ability, but knowledge isn't. Knowledge and understanding from the knowledge is the thing we've got to do. And Huxley said that specifically in an essay, and I found that kind of profound. And I think it's something that, he was concerned with seeking for pleasure and just looking for amusement is an empty search in modern life. And I think as we go along, we can see that more and more. And I don't know what the answer is, because just seeking pleasure and amusement is fun. I think we all do it. There's a real pull to it.
Well, Huxley and Orwell, I think both realized what was coming, how unstoppable it was. And I know that in Ian Slater's book about Orwell, he criticized him because he couldn't come up with solutions. And I wasn't so sure that Orwell was the person who come up with the solutions. He just called what was happening as he saw it, and I think that flew in the face of Fabian socialists who kicked him out, or he left willingly. I think in a certain extent, too, I think that Huxley knew what was coming. It wasn't a pretty picture. And so they both did what they did, as I would think, as a result of their experiences, what they might have known was coming down the pike, and knowing how it would get there. Does that make any sense to you?
Yeah, it does. It does. Just getting back to Wells, I think Huxley saw in Wells like a direction that the world could go in that he didn't like. He had this to say about Wells' book Men Like Gods, which was Wells' utopian vision. He said, get rid of priests and kings, make Aeschylus and the differential calculus available to all, and the world will become a paradise, he scoffed. Men like gods, quote, annoyed me to the point of planning a parody, but when I started writing, I found the idea of a negative utopia so interesting that I forgot about Wells and launched into Brave New World. So Men Like Gods, Wells' utopian vision, where the utopians are committed to scientific rationalism and a self-negating collectivist state, which is what Wells' idea of a perfectible, perfect human being would live in. Huxley found that abhorrent. So I think there was definitely a split, and that's why I feel that Brave New World is definitely a warning. And, you know, Wells was in. He was on the ends. I mean, he knew what was coming. He had made a lot of predictions that came true, scientific predictions. And, you know, they work on things. Things are worked on in secret long before we find out about them.
Oh, yeah. Oh, the old statement was, let's see, if you're reading about it now, they probably had it in R&D 50 years before.
Yes, I think that's true.
And I just fell upon that when I was doing that project, looking at science fiction of the first half of the 20th century and what it portended for the 21st century, and that seems to fit almost perfectly. If you take a look at what was involved in Philip K. Dick's work, and even with Bradbury, Fahrenheit 451, Burgess, Clockwork Orange, and this book, Brave New World, Orwell's 1984, and that's what struck me too and got me going down the conspiracy rabbit hole. And that is, I finally said to myself, you know, all these writers, what's the odds that they all could have just great imaginations and hit it on the head? Was there something going on that they were privy to, which anybody could really get a look at, as I think we have? But back then...
Well, you know, I wonder if they're just privy to information of some... I think Wells was, but I think a lot of science fiction writers, especially Philip K. Dick, are working on a level beyond that. I think they've got some intuitive grasp, you want to call it ESP.
Yeah.
You know, Dick definitely was
agreed.
A visionary. I mean, his whole life, he'd hear voices, he'd hear God talk to him. I mean, some would say he was insane. And he was a difficult man to live with, but, you know, Dick is another guy I'm very, you know, Dick collector. I've got a whole shelf of his books I'm looking at right now. Great man. And he's a whole other topic of that you could do.
And yet it's interesting. Yeah, you're right. But now one of the things I think about, and you get that more from the book than you do from the movie, and that is you have Decker, the one who's supposed to, you know, take out the skin jobs.
Sure.
Having not such a great relationship with his wife, and getting a bit of an uplift, if you remember, on the mood organ.
Right. Well, you know that Dick didn't have a great relation with his wife either. His wife took everything from him near the end of his life. It was too bad that you know, like so many great artists, Dick didn't reach commercial success until he had died. You know, he had money problems his whole life, and
but you know, you can see the theme though there as well about the modern techno world and what it would do to human beings. And if you just permit me to do this, these are words that could, I think, come as easily from Orwell as it did Huxley. But he wrote an essay, I guess, called "What a World We Live In." Are you familiar with that?
Dick?
Oh no, Huxley.
Oh, Huxley. I may have read it, but
it's
I'm
one
not
of many,
specifically familiar. Yeah, he wrote a lot of essays.
Well, when he talked about the plight of, it was of the English slump or the unemployment, and you can take a look and see what's happening today as well globally, but he said, the sad and humiliating conclusion is forced on one that the only thing to do is flee and hide. Nothing one can do is any good, and the doing is liable to infect one with the disease one is trying to treat. So there's nothing for it but to make one's escape while one can, as long as one can. I mean, I think that could have come as easily from Orwell as well. And so I think that there was at least an understanding mutual between them, if not spoken upon between them, where they saw what was going to come, and these were their commentaries on it. They chose to come from different elements. I know that a lot of people kind of treat Brave New World with contemptuousness, as they do its author. And as we were kind of kicking around a little while ago, are we guilty in many ways of taking our feelings, and perhaps rightfully so, about Huxley and affixing it to his work, which should be separated?
Well, I think it's a question sometimes of confusing the message with the messenger. Huxley wasn't a war man. A lot of things about his lifestyle, a lot of people wouldn't condone. Like his wife set him up with. His wife was bisexual and set him up with girlfriends that they could both enjoy. Some might say that's the perfect wife, and others would say that she's, a sinner. So it depends on how you look at it. But he had a different lifestyle. He moved amongst a Hollywood crowd, and his wife was a member of a coterie of famous Hollywood lesbians that we need not name, and that was their society. A lot of people wouldn't like that. A lot of people would disagree with it. But Huxley, at no point that I can see, told everyone to live like him. He believed in human freedom, and he would not tell anyone to live like me or be like this. And he felt that he classified the dangerous things in the world at the time. Back in the 30s, he wrote one essay, and he classified the most dangerous things in the world, and he said first was nationalism and or approaches to the world, and he classified different approaches to the world. And he had like nationalism, he had progress, modern progress, he had socialism. And he said the worst is nationalism. He mentioned the Nazis, and this was before the war, and he mentioned why it was bad and why he didn't like it. And then he said socialism is a little better because at least they have aims for improving the world, and then he said that basically that the best thing we have going for human freedom is this notion of progress, and he didn't like that either because progress was mainly promoted by capitalists who wanted you to buy a lot of stuff and consume. And he was very prescient in this. Because basically, this is what we're told today, that we'll be happy by buying a lot of stuff and consuming. And he said that capitalists just wanted us to buy this stuff, and ultimately that won't make us happy. It'll make the capitalists happy, but it won't make us happy. And he also said that the scientists that just believe generally in human progress onward and upward forever, and he didn't mention Wells by name, but you could stick that name in there. And so he said the best hope for human freedom is probably, unfortunately, in the last group until we can get to a point where everyone decides to live like a saint, basically is what he said. And, when's that going to happen? Right. So he basically said the worst of all, the best of all possible bad choices is what we've got, the capitalist system of the West to get some kind of human freedom. But he said, look around, this was in 1933, look around you, this is failing too. So what are we going to do? And you could say the same thing today. Our capitalist system is basically collapsed, and if it weren't for Joe Taxpayer, you and me, it would have collapsed. So, it's socialism for capitalism now.
Well, I tell you what, I'm gonna save what would be a pretty big question. If I could presume that we might be able to revisit this, make a part 2 out of it.
Sure, I'd be happy to go on with it because it goes on to so many other places. Once you look at Huxley, and he, it would have been interesting. Huxley died on the day Kennedy was shot.
Yeah. And
it would have been interesting if he had lived another 10 years to see where the whole drug thing went. Because, in a way, by opening the drug door, which is, he was one of the people that made it, him and Timothy Leary and others, that sort of brought LSD out to the public. And in so doing, it made people think, well, if this drug is good, any drug is good. And so a lot of people got into some other drugs that maybe weren't so good. And it just made the whole, somehow from LSD, it seemed like people accepted try anything and see how it works out for you. And, that's not necessarily good. Personally, I wasn't a big drug guy, not that I never did it, but it just didn't seem to do it for me that much. And so I'd look around. I came up through the 60s, and if you looked at me then, I'd look like a hippie, like a lot of other guys. And I'd watch it, and, we could go through that whole story. And like you said, Keith, it was a different time. And, things were strange. And I don't know.
Yeah. Oh, listen.
I tend to think, there's something to mind control, because if the people that were around then, if I'm, 18-year-old me around now, I'd be running around smashing things and burning things down. And people aren't. They're not upset. They're just accepting it. You look at, and that's a whole other question. Why is this?
One of the things, if I could inject, and this is why I go after Alex Jones and a lot of the other fearmongers. I'm not saying things aren't going to be bad in times to come, that law enforcement will get more militarized. But what happened, and you know this, and I know this, what happened in the 60s, which seemed kind of to come to an almost screeching halt with Kent State. There were protests, there were massacres, there was bombs going off all the time. It was crazy. Just like, I think you're alluding to as well. And things were nasty then. And there were a lot of helmeted police who cracked a lot of skulls. And I had a friend who once said that while going cross country on a trip somewhere in Ohio, it's 6 o'clock. They get a hotel. The family turns on the TV. It's August, and he's watching these helmeted police guys just beating the snot out of all these 20-somethings or teenagers. And he's going, where the hell is this? Hungary, Czechoslovakia? No, it was Chicago.
Yeah.
At the Democratic Convention. And this is nobody who hasn't lived through that period, you don't have any right to tell me how bad it is today, because you don't know how bad it can get. And it's going to go, I know, but it's not there yet. And the other thing we have to remember is, things get bad. The Roman Empire fell, but I think most people lived through it. Most people probably, the average peasant, average person working on a farm probably didn't even notice it. Who noticed it? The people that ran the place definitely noticed it. That was it. You can have, we could have massive change in this country at the higher levels, and a lot of people won't even notice it. They'll go on doing what they do, So. Well, I'm thinking about buying land in northeast Washington State, and I believe that's going to happen. And talking to somebody about it, how much can we get detached from everything so that whatever happens, just as you were saying, it isn't going to make much of a difference to us. We won't be able to really perceive it. And I think back to that movie Jeremiah Johnson, if you remember that with Robert Redford.
I've seen it a while back.
Well, what happens is he meets somebody up on the mountain, if you remember, and he had been in the Mexican War. And somebody says, well, about the war. He goes, there's another? So, you're right. Life does go on. It may not be as full as it was once upon a time, but then that's relative as well. But as you said, and if we can close on this, thinking back to that essay that Huxley wrote about all the supposed remedies for the problems might be as bad, or create the very problems you're trying to supposedly deal with. And now I think, as you just mentioned, to me, the bankers have always ruled the world, and they got into it early, and they've got it perfected. But I believe, not Marx, but the banking element, if you will, and we won't go any further to who's they, created socialism, created capitalism, and created communism. And now we're starting to see all those systems, those three systems, start to meld into one. And I believe that all them, more or less, and especially capitalism, which supposedly had the greatest light, was meant to be corrupted and destructed so that we would be brought into, as you said before, a global government which will probably be more like communism than any of the other two. And I'll let you have the last shot on that, if you will, and we'll call it a day.
Okay, well, I can't add a lot to that. We covered a lot of space today, and made a lot of points. And the only thing I want to leave on with Huxley is he's a hard man to understand, and he changed throughout his life. And but he was a hard man to like, and he was not a people person. So when you look at Huxley, just he's a little not that he was antisocial, but he admitted his original intention was to become a doctor And then he said, well, I'll be a research, be in medical research, because he understood he didn't have the people skills. He wasn't a warm enough person to be a physician. And so he understood his own limitations. Right. And for that, I admire him for that. And all in all, I don't know if you can make the conclusion he's a good guy or a bad guy. It depends on who you are, how you're looking at him. I think he is a very interesting man, though.
All right. I want to tell folks that, as John has said earlier, if you want to weigh in on this, and of course there'll be another show, and we can address whatever comments you might have or questions or whatever, by going to johnnyb93.blogspot.com. That link is on the Think or Be Eaten page along with this audio. And again, if you can keep it reasonable, then by all means, he'll countenance those intelligent questions, comments, and instructions. So thanks for being with us, John.
My pleasure.
We'll do a part 2. So just stay with us. Stay with me for a second. Folks, this has been Think or Be Eaten. You can take a look around Angie's site. I thank her for availing that site, or me for that site. And we'll also have the Grassy Knoll archives going, a second volume in the month of June. So thank you for being with us. We'll see you next time.